Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. So let me start today's video by showing you a very interesting graphic. Here is the graphic for you, and it illustrates a fascinating story. The story goes like this, that both India and China got independence at approximately the same time. And you can see from the graph that till approximately 1980, our GDPs were roughly the same. And post 1980, something magical happened in China. And now we are in a situation where China's GDP per capita is at least 2.5x that of India. In the last 40 years, China has pulled out approximately 850 million people out of poverty and has gone on to become one of the most powerful economies, military and expansionist country in the world. So the objective of today's video is very simple. One, I will help you understand the history behind China's growth. Second, we will see that whether that model can be replicated in India. And third and finally, what are three critical things that India needs to do and how you can contribute to that growth. So that is the agenda for today. Super important video simply because of the viewpoint that if you understand this 360-degree analysis, you can become a better investor. You will be able to spot opportunities within India. Moreover, it will give you quick insight and lesson as to how political ideologies, economy, history coalesce together and generate powerful economies. So the word of the day today is coalesce. So let me know what does that mean and let us kickstart the video. Also, a very quick shout out to our sponsors for today, which is Cuckoo FM. It's an excellent audio knowledge-based enhancement platform. You can listen to books, you can listen to podcasts, you can listen to different shows. And one of the shows that can help you along with watching this video to learn about China is listen to this particular book called as How China Got Rich. I'm linking the book in the description box. You can check it out. So to understand China's growth story, you need to understand its history. Now you'll say, Akshat, history is a very boring subject. Why are you talking about history? No, you need to study history because history shapes politics, politics shapes economics, economics shapes finance, and finance shapes money. And that is how YouTube finance influencers also make money. So in order to become a good YouTube finance influencer, you need to be very good at history also. But jokes apart, this is actually a very important lesson and three important key phases that you need to know about this. So I'll make this fun, interesting for you. So the first key phase was the Mao Zedong phase. So this was the person who established the People's Republic of China party, which is the communist party in China. And he was the father of that party, so to say. So he started a cultural revolution in China and people in China saw Mao Zedong as a revolutionary figure. So what his contribution to China was that he was able to unify people. Now you might ask that, okay, how did he exactly unify people? He basically came across as a strong figure who stood up to Western powers. So as a result, a lot of people rallied behind him. They thought that, hey, we have someone in China who can give takkar to Western people, and people started rallying behind him. But was Mao Zedong a great economist and was he able to transform the economy in China? The answer was absolutely not. So Mao Zedong's phase roughly lasted from 1950s to late 1970s, and as you can see that from the first chart, that China's GDP mimicked India's GDP during that phase in time. Now you might say that, okay, why do you think, Akshat, that Mao Zedong did not contribute much to Chinese economy per se? That can be easily understood through a simple story in the late 1950s and early 1960s that happened in China, that China went through a very depressing phase in terms of the famine that hit. So there was a severe famine that hit. There was severe food shortage in China. In fact, the situation in China was so bad that there was hardly any food grain left for majority of the population. So that is how bad the situation in early 60s was. So what was the reason for it? It was very simple, and this can be encapsulated from one of the articles from Wikipedia, and it categorically points out that there was a series of failures that undertook. One of the primary being that the Chinese government at that time controlled the entire mode of production. So it was a pure communist regime, and as a result, there was no prosperity. They were trying to control all the resources. To cut the long story short, there was no economic growth that happened, and it led to a famine. So that was the simple argument there, that the economy was not growing. Whatever resources were there with the government, they were trying to control everything. There was never an economic expansion of the pie. Which brings us to phase 2, which is led by Deng Xiaoping. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so we'll call him Mr. Deng, right? So Mr. Deng was a great leader. He was a great visionary, and he understood the power of capitalism. This can be encapsulated from one of his quotes, and I'm paraphrasing it here. So what he simply said was that, hey, whether the cat is white or it is black, as long as it is able to catch a mice, it is a good cat. What he meant through this quote was that, hey, you can be a capitalist country, you can be a socialist country, communist country, it does not matter. What matters is that are your people becoming richer or not? Mr. Deng was a very intelligent guy. He was already working with PRC, the party that Mao Zedong had established. He rose the ranks and eventually he became the leader of China, and he worked with a very open mind. That can be seen from the fact that when he took over office, so he basically managed China from roughly 1980s to early 2000s. And that was the massive growth phase for China, where it ended up creating a rising tide that pulled out roughly 650 million people out of poverty under Mr. Deng's regime. Now, many of us imagine that, China is a communist country, it controls everything, people get no freedom. There are like 500 mini Kim Jong-un who are roaming around in China, controlling everyone. No, none of that stuff. In fact, Mr. Deng studied the economies of rising countries in Southeast Asia. For example, he studied the economic model of Hong Kong. He studied the economic model of Singapore and a bunch of other growing countries. And what he figured out was that, hey, number one, controlled capitalism works. Number two, you need to migrate from an agriculture-oriented economy to an industry-oriented economy. And that is precisely what he was able to do and achieve. Now take a look at this particular chart and you can clearly see that whether it came to exports of consumer goods, raw material, textile, intermediate goods, components, China grew in every single one of these measures and it started to diversify its export base. This word diversification is extremely important for you to understand because this is something that we as Indians currently are struggling with. Our exports are not very well diversified, at least to the tune of China. And if you go back and look at a bankrupt economy like Sri Lanka, majority of their export base was just comprised of 3 commodities. That's it. So a good diversified export base can constitute as a good thing for an economy. One of the key contributions of Mr. Deng was that he was able to build Shanghai into an export hub, Shenzhen region as one of the biggest SEZ, special economic zones, by bringing in a lot of foreign capital to the Chinese economy. So a contribution of open thinking, good philosophy, good fundamental execution with openness in the economy brought a lot of foreign capital into the Chinese economy and it helped people grow and improve their living standards. Now comes the third phase for the China's growth engine, which is built on Mr. Xi Jinping, who took power in 2000s and has been ruling since, so to say. His biggest contribution from a vision point of view is that he has been able to expand the military dominance of China. That's one. Second, he's at a juncture where he's trying to make China from dominating the low export industry to getting into areas like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and doing that high-end tech-based exports. And that is the battle that Xi Jinping is trying to find. He's trying to build on what 2 previous leaders in China have done. That the first, Mr. Mao Zedong, he unified the Chinese people. Second, Mr. Deng, he was able to expand the Chinese economy. And now Xi Jinping has taken the Chinese economy to new heights, so to say, and China is now exerting its global dominance and global influence. So what can you learn and summarize from this story? The summary is that you can't redistribute wealth that you have not created. The biggest way of creating wealth is to adopt capitalism. This is not my viewpoint. This is what the history tells us. If you go and study the history of the US, or if you go and study the history of the British Empire or the Dutch Empire, all thrived on capitalism. They were able to build wealth first and then figure out a way to redistribute that wealth more sensibly. That is the simple point that you need to keep in mind, that when we start talking about freebie economics in India, that okay, you know what, itni bijli free de do, and this money free de do, and start these 500 different schemes. Ask yourself the simple question that do you have the wealth to do it? This is not just my viewpoint. There have been several economists who have outlined this viewpoint that hey, India needs to grow first, create wealth first, build an economic wealth generation engine, then go and start distributing that wealth and talk about fair distribution, so to say. It sounds a little bit insensitive, but do you really believe that without creating wealth, a nation can become prosperous? The answer is absolutely not. So this brings us to the part 2 of the story that hey, can India replicate China's model, or can India figure out its own model to grow and thrive in this world and become probably an apex economy, or if not the apex economy, can it come in top 3 in absolute terms, so to say? So let us start that discussion, and as per my analysis, there are 4 key factors that are required for a nation to grow really big. The first key factor is that there should be unification of the nation. The people within that nation should not feel alienated. I will leave it to your imagination and tell me very honestly that certain segments of people in India, do they feel alienated or not? I am not trying to make this a political debate. I am giving you pointed, fact-based, analytical arguments on economics. So this is an opinionated thing. I can't show you data because there is no such research that has been done in India, but you can pretty much gauge the sentiments. That is point 1. Second key thing, that do we have elements for growth? For example, this could be younger population, which played a key factor in China's growth. Younger population also helped the UK. It also helped the US. So do we have younger population? The answer is absolutely yes. We have massive young population. Not only that, we are winning in that segment. I will show you 2 charts. One is for China and this is the chart that you can see, it categorically proves that the Chinese population is getting older by the decade. So they are on a decline. On the flip side, take a look at this particular chart and you can clearly see that India has at least 3 decades of growth left when it comes to that demographic dividend, where the population is young, they can work more, they can spend more time improving the productivity of the nation, and that can translate into improved GDP for all the people involved. Now add to that other factors of growth. For example, cheap availability of labor, cheap availability of data, bunch of other macroeconomic factors at play. So when it comes to this second point, India seems extremely strong. And this is what everyone keeps telling you, that hey, India is going to become a massive power in the next 10 years. It will become an economic powerhouse. This is the reason why, because people look at this point too and they get super excited about India's growth potential. Now comes the third point, that hey, do we have directional efforts? For example, when it comes to Mr. Deng, he was able to make a directional effort in China and lead China with a vision. Now ask yourself a simple question. Why did India start lagging behind in the race with China? Till 1980s, both the countries were on the same page. Why did China grow and India did not? The answer was that China started opening up its economy much before India under Mr. Deng. So he was able to open up Chinese economy much before India. India opened its economy in 1991. Now why opening up of economy is good? Now I can make a separate video on that topic, but to cut the long story short, opening up of economy simply indicates that you are trying to put capitalistic practices in your own economy. It signals to foreign investors that hey, you know what, there are opportunities in India or China for me to grow as a capitalist, so let me put my hard-earned money in these economies. If a situation arises when a capitalist is not able to pour in the money in a particular economy and make returns out of it, why would that person invest their money? The answer is you would not, and none of the industrialists would. Now with that viewpoint in place, ask yourself that are directional efforts being made in India? Now I'm not trying to criticize anyone, but here is a short clip that will tell you a very sad state of affairs about what happened in India in 2014.
Mobile phone making major Nokia shut down its largest plant at Tamilnadu Sri Pelambur, making over 8,000 workers jobless. Now,
the dispute was over a $1.5 billion tax demand slapped on retroactively by authorities for alleged owed taxes.
So the backdrop was that back in 2014, Nokia started such a big factory in India. Unfortunately, it had to close down. Why? Because of tax disputes. Eventually, when the matter escalated to the courts, Nokia was able to get some claims from the Indian government, but it signaled to a lot of people that, you know what, India is probably not the right place to do businesses. Has the situation changed in India? I will not comment because then the video becomes political, but do an independent analysis and you can see the answer for yourself. But regarding this point number 3 around directional efforts, I'll make a more systemic point. The systemic point being that in India, we have something called as representative democracy. We do not have direct democracy. If you want, I'll explain you the differences about all these different types of political structures also. Let me know if you're interested in me doing that video. I'll be happy to do it. What happens in this representative democracy in India is that there is a continuity of elections that keep on happening, and the only job for politicians becomes to win elections. That's it. That's what their entire focus is. That how do we get elected as a representative? Now, honestly, that is not a great system. If the focus of the entire government or politics is just to get the kursi, then no one ends up caring about Vikas and Pragati. So that becomes a problem. So in this kursi ki ladai or fight for chair, what ends up happening is that the development or Vikas just goes out of the window. Now comes the fourth and final factor as to whether a nation can grow or not. And a lot of it depends on external circumstances. That whether the world economy is doing well, whether the peace is there, whether the climate change conditions are conducive or not, whether the globalization is taking place or not. So many external factors are there, impossible for us to analyze. But if there is one single factor that you could analyze here is, you must analyze how peaceful the world has been in certain periods. For example, take a look at this chart and you can clearly see that from 1990s to 2000, the world was relatively quiet. It was peaceful. There were fewer conflicts. The same situation happened from approximately 2005 to 2010, and this period was the most impressive growth period for China, and China benefited from this external peace. Unfortunately now, after 2016, when there was US-China trade war that took place, the world unfortunately has become more and more tumultuous. So the bottom line is that India can undertake step 1, 2, 3 correctly and do everything in its power, but if the fourth factor is not working out for India, which is global peace and other global macroeconomic factors, then despite having all the ingredients for growth, a country like India would not move forward. So that is the sad state of affairs, and looking at the picture right now, world right now seems to be in huge turmoil. Will it go away? Yes, of course, I'm an optimist. I do feel that the world will become quieter and peaceful with time, but I really hope that there would be no more crisis and it will give India some breeding ground to utilize its demography and start growing. So in order to grow, of course, we are talking about a macro issue. So this can be a list of 100 items, but I will speak about 3 most critical items at play. So first is that India needs to use its labor intensively and very, very carefully and improve its labor force participation in real sense. What do I mean? I simply mean that in India, the majority of the population depends on agriculture. In agriculture, there is something called as disguised employment. Now, disguised employment simply means, so imagine a family of 10 people who are doing farming and 3 of them are brothers with 3 wives. So 6 people, they go and they work in the fields. Now, it might happen that there is just one central person who is taking care of everything. Other people just go to accompany him. For example, in India, there is a very funny thing that many a times in India, in tier 2, tier 3 cities, when you go to a petrol pump, you will often find these type of scenes that one guy is going to fill the petrol. 3 of his friends will accompany him. So who is doing the work? That one guy, and he could have easily accomplished that work of getting the petrol tank filled, but he has just 3 friends who are accompanying him. So this becomes like a disguised employment scenario that people just feel that they are working, but in reality they are not. So the same is the situation with farming in India, that yes, 6 members are going to the field every day, but honestly 1 or 2 might be working and rest are just going there just for that. So the important point here to note is that in the agriculture field in India, majority of our population is involved in agriculture and there is very high level of disguised employment in this scenario. Here is a brief article for you. Read this, you will understand this point more. Now the natural question comes that, okay, why in India that if one person goes to fill petrol, 3 people accompany him? Why is that the case? Because probably people do not have jobs. There is huge scarcity of jobs. If people can invest their time productively, they will contribute to India's GDP. So that is a simple thing, that India needs more naukri in real sense. Now comes the second core problem in India, that in India, the female to male ratio is roughly 50%. So if there are 100 people, 50 would be females, 50 would be males in India, roughly speaking. But the problem is that the labor force participation for females in India is one of the worst in the world. In fact, you might have recently read the articles that Bangladesh's GDP is ahead of India now. Why? Because one of the central reasons is that females in Bangladesh, they get to participate in the workforce economy and contribute to GDP. But in India, that is not the case. Here is a chart for you, which you can clearly see that in India, the labor force participation of females is roughly 20%, which is an extremely dismal figure for 50% population in India. So when we say that, hey, you know what, India's GDP should improve, one of the easiest way of improving it is by increasing the female participation in the workforce in India. Now comes the third point, that India is not an innovative country as of now. We can talk incessantly about make in India, growth in India, XYZ in India, but unfortunately we are still a very much welfare driven economy. If I speak more on it, then again people will tag me on Twitter saying that, you know what, Akshat wants to join AAP or this, that party or that party. No, I don't want to join any political party. But here is an interesting case study about Venezuela. Please read this paragraph. It's super important. At one point in time, Venezuelan economy was oil rich and they used to make crazy amount of money. Despite being crazy amount of money, they engaged in welfare economics, that hey, distribute this, distribute that, everything distribute, distribute, distribute. And it became one of the worst countries from an economics point of view going forward. So welfareism in the long term does not bode well. This is something that I'm deeply worried about in India. Therefore, I keep talking about it and I would continue to talk about it. So do support this video in case you agree with this. So a simple method of growing India: number 1, make your workforce more productive. Number 2, bring more females into the workforce. That automatically pushes up your GDP. Number 3, innovate and find your moat. Finding your moat means that in China, for example, they figured out their moat was low cost production and they were able to export that low cost production of basic goods across the world, be it Chinese toys, be it Chinese Diwali crackers, be it Chinese bats. Yeah, in a way. They exported bats also in the form of coronavirus. But yeah, I hope you get the picture. And India too needs to find its moat. And if it is able to do it, it will accelerate and become one of the top prominent countries in the world. I have full faith and I am an optimist about India. I just really hope that our political structures improve so that we can explore and optimize our potential. Thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you tomorrow.